Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, we have good audio. And thank you all for coming tonight. What I have to show you is very exciting to me. And something I've been working very hard on for different reasons. My name is John Stritzinger, and I am the CEO of Greenville Associates. We are a small Pennsylvania-based consulting firm. And we are developing some enterprise software that should be in the marketplace fairly soon. From a commercial side, we also have some open source software that we've had on GitHub for several years. So we're in our 6th generation of software, and we are moving into sort of HA systems this year, which we think is necessary to be able to sell our services directly. Anyway, I'm going to just go into about 10 minutes of training tonight. My topic is, how do you take a REST interface that you've developed at Visual Studio and turn that into a real world application? I have been studying REST at my university here on the side, and as part of our class, we built REST interfaces that ran on our local laptops, or they ran off Docker interfaces. And although those are cool and it'll allow you to learn the technology, they don't really take you from the development world to production. So how do you get your laptop to work on the internet is what we're going to be discussing tonight. So I have a short presentation here, and then I will take you through to a live demo. So the very first thing that I'm going to show you here is a short little PowerPoint. So we are talking tonight about advanced REST services, and we are producing a series of 3 videos. The first one's going to be on IIS server. The second is going to be based on NGINX, which is a Linux load balancer. And then the third, I'm going to go into Apache. So we're going to use the same backend for 3 different web servers just to show you how to do the same thing. So if you've seen this video, you probably only need to fast forward through the others. But what I'm going to be showing you today is how do you take a real public URL and register it, and then once you do, turn that into something real. So when you work in Docker, you work in Visual Studio, it creates a port for you dynamically. So it generates a random port in the range of 65,000 plus ports. And when you compile and build your REST interface, it builds it to a specific local host port number. So it works on your local laptop, it works on your local server, but it doesn't work on the internet because the port that you're using isn't accessible to the rest of the world. So I have a server across town, and I am here on campus, and I cannot reach the port on my server over my campus network, yet alone the public internet. So what we're showing you today is how do you build a public internet interface and get that to work, which is really what you have to do in the real world. So what we're going to be doing beyond registering a domain name is we're going to be mapping HTTPS or secure web services into HTTP into our REST API. And the reason we want to do that is because SSL handoffs can be very complicated. When you go to sell something to a customer, you probably don't want to do this, but if you are in semi-prod and you want to get your stuff working across the world, this is the best way to do it. And that's to take SSL sort of inside of your web server out of play. So what we're doing is we're terminating SSL and then we are dropping the SSL to our REST server so that it's called SSL offload technically. And so what we're doing is we're dropping the secure port portion of the signal just to the web server front end, and the back end is going to be running just internal to the box. We are going to show you how to configure Visual Studio for a specific port. And then we are going to demonstrate the result. Hopefully it's all going to come out the way we want. Now, a competing solution, and what they teach you in a lot of classes now, is how to use Docker to build an API and build a front end on the same machine. And so what Docker does is it provides a redirect from the local machine to a container running your interfaces. So Docker does the routing from a local machine that has 65,000 ports to virtual ports that exist inside the container. So for every external local interface, there's a container interface, and you can have as many, 65,000 times the number of containers you have running in the background. So Docker is a very big, robust router in itself. So it's a complicated system. What we're doing is a little more simple than that. We are building an API that's running on a specific port, and we're just using IIS to redirect our traffic from port 80 into my REST interface. And as I told you, there are three possibilities. Apache, NGINX, and IIS are the three main web servers on the market with more than 90% market share. In this video, we are just looking at IIS. So in the other videos that I will be presenting, you'll see the other two. Now, a warning before I get started today, when you go to YouTube, I have sort of looked through the existing training that's on the web, and it's way too simple, mainly because they're showing you very simple local host maps from one port to the other. This is taking an external public domain and remapping it into a REST interface. So for this solution, you need both an inbound process to map from your public URL to a local host, and then you need an outbound rule that will take data sent back from the API to the public internet. So you need to be able to do both of those things. So you need both an inbound and an outbound rule. The 5 or 6 videos that are on YouTube as of today mostly only show one rule, and in fact, they do provide the wrong and frustrating result. So some of them are like 2 minutes long, and you think you're going to get a great result, and it turns out you might spend weeks trying to debug what you did wrong. Now, the requirements for my demonstration today are an IIS Webserver, which is Microsoft's web services that run on Windows 10. It runs on Windows Server, all the variants. And we are installing redirect module and rewrite module. Now, those things you can download from the Microsoft site. They do need to be installed, and I will show you how to verify that they are, but I'm not going to take you through that process. It's this class would be a little bit beyond that. Now, what's also helpful is if you want to secure your API, you can actually turn on Microsoft Domain Controller Authentication to your external URL. And if you do that, then every request to the web server has to have a username and password associated with it. I wouldn't do it initially because it very much complicates your development world, but it is required for most companies to go to production. Now, along with a domain controller, again, configuring authentication is important. And what I'm going to show you today is just part of the process. If you're using NGINX or Apache, those take a little bit more time and have a different process. But it is essentially the same thing. Now, the code requirements for this, we are running a compiled REST API from Visual Studio. We're using their weather forecast API, which is the standard project build. So we haven't written any code at all. We just installed the REST API and we compiled it, but we made some tweaks so that it goes to the right port. So we're not sharing any secrets here. This is a very simple app and it does return. It just generates weather data based on random numbers. So it picks a temperature and whether it's raining or cloudy outside. So the default Microsoft REST API is what we're using today, but there are many other APIs that are now being bundled with open source software. So if you use WordPress or use Joomla, they have their own APIs and they run natively on local ports. So what I'm showing you here doesn't really apply, but this is for custom development. So what we are doing is we are building an API and we're running it on localhost to this specific port. So that's what we're going to show you today. So in summary, we have an IIS server that's going to redirect traffic from port 80 to, in my case, what we're going to show you today is port 10,080. I just added 10,000 to the port number, and that is going to result in what we're doing today. I use that just because I remember it. I always remember port 80. You can use that with 10,443. So if you use SSL, you can just add 10,000 to your port and voila, you have something that's logical to operations people. And the default Microsoft build comes with Swagger, and Swagger just allows you a different mechanism to check your API. So that's pretty much it for my presentation here. Before I get into the live demo, I'm just going to show you that I'm running NS lookup, and earlier tonight I provisioned a public IP to this IP address. So I have a real domain that I provisioned. I use GoDaddy. So I went into GoDaddy, I provisioned this API, and then I provisioned SSL. So I'm not going to take you through SSL provisioning tonight because what I do is proprietary, but I will show you sort of the result here. So I have a REST interface that is working already and it is running. And what I am showing here is that in your launch settings, you are going to put the default port that you want to run on. So I told you that I'm running HTTP on 10,080, and I'm using that here. I have Secure Server running on a different port. So I have them both working, and the interesting thing is if you provide a specific application URL to Visual Studio, when you compile your code, it shows you here that it's listening to all ports on that address. So it ends up listening to every URL with the port 10,000. You know, if it's not being occupied on the server, it will listen to every URL coming into that port. Will go to the API. So the only unusual thing here is I've just started Visual Studio with HTTP, and I did that intentionally from the top, but that is pretty much it. You're just going to provision in your launch settings, which is under the Properties tab, the specific URL you're using. Now, along with that, I do have Swagger somewhere running. I'm going to stop this and restart it. And you'll see that it will launch Swagger for me. So you see up here at the top of Visual Studio, I am using the default weather forecast project. You can see it. This is unmodified. So I just I built a sample project. I'm calling it weather test. So when I go into Visual Studio, I created this application, and under the properties here, what I just showed you is the launch settings.json. That's where you're going to put what I just showed you on the screen. So when I launch this, I have it configured to launch Swagger, and it does that out of the box. So if you use Visual Studio to provision your project, it will include Swagger, and eventually it will bring it up for us to look at. So I'm going to show you Swagger in a minute. But while that is loading, I am going to show you what I did to the web server so that you can do the same. All right. So this is the IIS manager. And when you go into IIS manager, you can call your site anything you want. As you can see, I have a lot of sites. These are individual URLs that I'm terminating. And if you go to the specific site you're looking at and click on it, it will bring up your website. So I just showed you that I had provisioned the domain, and I have gone into IIS server and created a new website with the same name. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to terminate your URL. So you have to go into bindings, and on bindings, you'll see that you can add the host name and the ports that you want it to listen to. So remember, we are terminating from the public internet to a specific URL, and so you have to provision that URL. Now, I've already done that here, and you'll see that I have provisioned an SSL certificate already on the site, and I've tested that, so I know that my public interface works. I will demonstrate that in just a minute. But what I've done here is, okay, Swagger's coming up. My machine's a little slow tonight because I've added a few virtual machines that are causing me challenges. But what I've done here is I've gone into, let's see, you can see that I have all of the modules loaded. And I'm going to click on HTTP redirect for my site. Let's see, go back one. I'm sorry. I'm going to go to URL rewrite. And when you go into this system, you're going to add a rule. And when you add a rule, you're going to select reverse proxy. And when you click on reverse proxy, it brings up a window of what the inbound rule is going to be. So what you're going to type here, just to look at what I'm doing on my site, is I am entering rest.geolocation.info, which is our managed services, and I'm enabling SSL offload. What that means is any SSL traffic will have its SSL, the secure part of the transmission, stripped before it's handed off to the API. If you don't turn that on, then it will pass secure traffic to your API. So if your API is configured for secure traffic, that may not be a problem, but if it's not, that will cause you problems. Now, the other thing I'm doing here is I'm telling the web server what port to forward to. And in this case, I am forwarding to port 10 to 1080. So that is what I'm trying to accomplish today. So when you put the configuration in, again, this is going to be the port that you're using inside the REST API, and that is your inbound rule. So what we're doing is we're taking from the REST interface, and you can the same address, or you can map this to localhost. So if you wanted to do localhost, in my case, that's what I've done tonight. I'm mapping to localhost, and to port 10,080. And then I have to create a rule coming back that translates from localhost 10,080, and it's going to go back out to rest.glocation.info. So I'm remapping, rewriting the traffic that's coming in. I'm dropping the SSL, I'm handing it off local, and on the way back, when the API responds, it's got to reconstruct the entire URL going outbound so that the traffic going to the client ends up with the right result. So that's what we're trying to do. This is what you're going to enter very specifically. And once you do, you end up getting this working system that you can click on the rules, and it shows you a pattern here. Now this pattern is I'm matching all. So I'm taking everything that hits that URL in this example. You can get into very complex designs, but in this example, I'm taking every bit of traffic that goes to that REST URL and mapping it into my API. And you can see what IIS is doing. It is creating anything that comes in externally, it's going to rewrite to the API, to that port. And that is pretty much what we're doing on the inbound rule. Now, on the outbound rule, when you follow the form that I just gave you, it ends up building the match back so that all the responses are going back from whatever the local host is into this new REST destination. So everything inbound will be mapped back out the same way. So you do need an inbound rule and an outbound rule, and I will show you the beautiful result in just a minute. So that is really what we have going on. Now, there's one other thing that you might want to look at, and that is for security. When you go to provision security on your REST API, in IIS, it's very simple. If you go into authentication.net, you can do .NET authorization rules, and you can also do authentication rules, which is what we're going to show tonight. And all you have to do to turn on password protection on your website is just enable Windows authentication. So if your machine is in a domain and you have users provisioned, all you have to do to secure your API in IIS is just enable Windows authentication, and voila, everything else works. So that is something that we're not going to focus on tonight because it takes a little bit more time. But we are going to do two things tonight. We are going to, first of all, bring up Swagger. And we are going to see if my whole thing worked. Should have tried that first, right? It is on my desktop. There we go. And voila. So when you hit the API with this configuration, Visual Studio is returning the code from that API. So everything is working perfectly. Now, when you go to write software, you're going to have your ASPX pages or your React pages or your Ionic mobile pages pointing at this URL. But the URL you're going to use is on port 80, so that when you're on the other side of the world, you can still get your data for your app, because remember, the app is going to be running locally or it might be hosted. And in either case, you need this data either to be able to communicate to a server or all the way to an end user client. So that's pretty much it. I have shown you in 25 minutes how to do that. And that is a very advanced task that without a little assistance might take you a few weeks actually to figure out. So that is, I think, very beneficial. So thank you very much. This is one of three. I'm going to show two others. I'll probably get better as I go, but certainly appreciate any likes and to subscribe as I'm trying to get a custom URL, and it's going to take me a little while. You need like 10,000 users or something like that before YouTube grants you something special like that. But anyway, this is important stuff, so certainly check it out.